lesson 32. Continue philosophy of the Kleshas, Sutra 3, Chapter 2, the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. The lack of awareness of reality, the sense of egoism or I-amness, attractions and repulsions towards objects, and the strong desire for life are the great afflictions or causes of all miseries in life. Patanjali reduces all possible misery in life to just 5 issues, which are our kleshas. In simple language, those 5 are ignorance, egoism, attachment, hatred, and fear. Now, the text then immediately jumps to an anecdote about a bully sergeant. And the reason why we have this story here is because it gives us a very practical example how to deal with fear. If you don't understand what the bully sergeant is doing, you think that he's a bully, a sadist. But maybe you have seen movies about drill sergeants. They always have the same kind of storyline. A bus full of recruits, unruly young men, arrive at an army training camp, full of brawn, full of big talk, tough talk, what have you. They come out of the bus to be confronted by the bully sergeant. And the bully sergeant immediately tries to put them straight. And he does that by bullying them, by being direct in their face, sometimes humiliating them, going into confrontation with them. If you don't understand what he's doing and why, then indeed you might think this person is evil. So I'm going to try to explain a little bit what is going on in such a situation. Because you will probably deal with such situations yourself, either on the receiving end or on the giving end. Soldiers are prepared for war. And wars, everybody wants to win them. To win a war, you need people who are capable of overcoming fear. Because war is very scary. Bullets flying around, bombs exploding, left and right your comrades are dying. The noise, the violence, the slaughter, terrifying. If you're not trained, you will just follow your instinct, drop everything and run as fast as you can. So battles cannot be won by men who run away, by soldiers who run away. These days women also join combat forces, so it's both, of course. And that is what the bully sergeant is doing. The unexperienced young recruits, they think they know it all, they think they can do it all, they think they will win battles just with a flick of the fingers. But the bully sergeant knows better. So he tries to shape them. He tries to get them in line, become part of a war machine, which all parts need to work together. So they have to. That is why the very first stage is to all take off your individual clothes and all put on clothes that are the same. No distinction anymore. The reason why their hair cut is because everybody has their own hairstyle to express their individuality. You have to get rid of your individuality, so all your heads are being shaven. And then you have to go to the obstacle course, do physically very difficult and sometimes impossible things. When you fail, instead of putting an arm over your shoulder and trying to comfort you, the bully sergeant will chastise you, he will scold you, he will even humiliate you in front of the other recruits. Can you imagine what happens? If you have no character, or if you're not the right person to become a combat soldier, you will break down in crying and you will quit, give up. All the better. The bully sergeant will be happy if you can't handle his treatment and you walk away. That's an elimination process. The other recruits, when confronted with the bullying, the humiliation, the scolding, what would you do? When somebody confronts you with your failure, in the end, confront you with your fear. It will fire you up. What? What? Are you calling me a pussy? You put your foot down and you say, wait a minute, I'm going to show you something. That is where you overcome your fear and you do the impossible. That is what is required from a successful army. To do the impossible. That is how battles are won. That is an extreme situation to make it clear. But there are other things going on in such situations that apply to all these kleshas that we are dealing with. Because the bully sergeant is not a bad guy. It sounds strange, but if the guy is in the right position, of course there are bully sergeants who are sadistic, just like there are teachers or parents or bosses or managers that have that tendency. But a real bully sergeant bullies with love. He wants you to survive. He wants you to be prepared as best as possible. So the strongest characters among the recruits usually invariably ends up in a conflict with the bully sergeant. They end up behind the barracks in a fist fight with each other, which the bully sergeant, of course, wins. In the end, they graduate, they get their beret or their insignias, and the bully sergeant and the people with which he clashed most end up drinking beer in a bar, slapping each other on the shoulders, making jokes, and showing real appreciation and affection. The recruits have turned into men, into qualified combat soldiers. And in the end, they realize, subconsciously or consciously, the work that the bully sergeants did. They realized the enormous growth that they made because of that. Extreme situation, but on a much milder level, you find this situation possibly with your parents, with whom, as a teenager, maybe even younger, as a child, you had conflicts. You can find this situation with teachers, with whom you had conflicts in the past. The purpose of this clash, this confrontation, is to make you transcend, to rise above. You can go down the line. Your fear of death, fear in general, rise above your fear by using anger. Hatred is the previous klesha that leads to fear of death. But hatred in itself can be used as a tool, but is also not good. So then you diminish it and you bring it back to ego, attachment, which you see when the bully sergeant and the recruits slap each other on the shoulder and give each other compliments about achievements or praise and thanks for all the work you've done for me. So you go from eliminating fear through anger, you eliminate anger through ego, create attachment, then you go back to in the end you end up with the ignorance, which is the basis for all the other kleshas. I skipped one. There's the fear of death, attachment, hatred. No, that's them. 5 of them. So, what you see here, 5 kleshas. The cause of the kleshas is the first klesha, leading to the one that come after it. That is, in fact, the next sutra. Sutra 4, avidya is the source of those that are mentioned after it, whether they are in the dormant, attenuated, alternating, or expanded condition. One of the biggest issues in human beings that determines our lives, that determines our decisions, that determines the way we think, it determines almost everything in our lives, is the final station of the kleshas is fear. Almost everything we do is fueled by fear, without us knowing it, of course. It's an instinct. It's the instinct that lies at the foundation, the very foundation of our being, literally. It is located in the lowest chakra, at the base of the spine. It is our strongest instinct because it is responsible for our survival. And because of that, it's also the biggest obstacle that we are facing in life. If you look around you, or look at yourself, possibly, you will see that all your frustrations, all your dissatisfactions, in the end can be traced back to the final klesha, fear. And that klesha is so strong that we become paralyzed and stay stuck in that condition. It is a condition that you see most of your family members and friends and colleagues in, without realizing it. It is the cause for us not to be able to move forward, to accept change. That is why we create a comfort zone, a bubble, in which we don't have to make difficult decisions if we can avoid them, in which basically we stay put. And we think that's good and that's comfortable. For most people that is acceptable, because they are in a condition of avidya, ignorance, which leads to every other klesha that follows. For a yogi, that is not acceptable anymore, because you become conscious. And the sense of being stuck, when you start to understand that, becomes unacceptable. And you know that it is fear. And you know who is going to be your bully sergeant? You. You're going to go into a conversation with yourself, telling yourself the things that a bully sergeant would do to the recruits. If you can't do this, if you can't even do this, you might as well just stay home and wash the dishes. Or wash the car, or you will be confronted with your fear, but for the first time it will be conscious. And you will learn to put your foot down. No matter how nice and friendly and flexible as you've always been, you will learn to put your foot down. Have you noticed that yogis are very stubborn people? That's because of this. Here it is very nicely laid out, but it is a natural process as a result of your becoming conscious. If it is a natural process, why do we need to study this? Because we still have the tendency to function subconsciously, and by studying this you take an enormous shortcut. The process just goes much, much faster if you rationalize it. You find this process everywhere. It is not that as a yogi you walk back from fear to attachment, to anger, to egoism, to ignorance, that you have solved the problem for the rest of your life and you'll never be struck by fear anymore. That's not how it works. It is a very dynamic process that you could solve in one particular situation, but it will appear the next day, the next week, with another situation, with another person, with another issue. The difference will be, first of all, that you are aware of it. Second of all, you become more and more skillful at dealing with it. You become experienced. You find this situation in relationships. Have you ever fallen in love? Truly in love? Ignorance is bliss. You fall in love and you are in heaven. Do you remember how long you stayed in heaven? But why were you not able to stay in heaven? The answer lies here. Ignorance leads to egoism, the sense of egoism or I amness. You fall in love, and if you're lucky, a relationship ensues between you and the object of your falling in love. And you are indeed in heaven. You see the world through pink glasses. For a while. But sooner rather than later, you become self-aware. Egoism kicks in. That is out of ignorance, that is the next stage. Of course, it is a very dynamic process, but you will recognize it. When ego kicks in, you become suspicious. What are you doing on your phone? Who are you texting? Where were you last night? Did you meet somebody? Although your partner didn't do anything wrong, your self-awareness leads to attachment, and you become suspicious if you don't pay attention, of course. It's a natural process. Many relationships are in the last stage of the Kleshas. Fear. They've had it all. Attachment based on self-awareness, attachment, anger. Have you ever seen a relationship without conflict? Anger, and eventually staying together out of fear. Many relationships are stuck. The people that I know at this moment, not so many, because I'm a bit of a hermit, but the people that I do know that are in a relationship, they want to be on their own. But the opposite side is that those people I know that are single, they wish to be together with somebody. That is a big dilemma, isn't it? Those who are in a relationship want to be single. Those who are single want to be together with somebody. The answer lies here. Unconditional love. Be aware of this process and do not allow yourself to be sucked up in it. Be aware of ego kicking in, leading to you wondering what your partner is doing now. Where and with whom and what have you. That's not easy. Like in the previous session, we already came to the conclusion that being a yogi and functioning like a yogi is in fact the most difficult thing to do in life, but everything starts making sense. And you will have a relationship in which you don't have to fight, in which you don't have to be angry all the time, or afraid. Not easy. But if you are conscious and you stay on top of things, it's possible. That means you have to let each other free. It has to come from both sides, of course. And it does not mean, letting each other free does not mean allowing your partner to be promiscuous. Because that is not unconditional love. It means to trust that your partner loves you and will not be promiscuous. It also means that if accidents happen, that you forgive, that you understand that not only I am only human, but everybody is only human and can make mistakes. I can make mistakes too. But you can make mistakes too. You know how forgiveness works? It's an ability to put yourself in the shoes of another person. I think I've used the example before of going into the subway, busy subway of course in Seoul, and being shoved out of the way while you're on your way to a free seat, being shoved out of the way by the proverbial ajima or halmoni. I mentioned it in this handout, but I think I've mentioned it in class before. Because the example it's about understanding where that elbow comes from. Where does that eagerness to be first in line come from? When I came to Korea 24 years ago, that happened. And the first reaction is anger. Rage. Not just anger, rage. What the hell? But then you look again. As a yogi, you develop the ability to contemplate, to connect with the essence of things, also with people, essence of people. And you start seeing the whole picture, the history of Korea, Korean War, the country totally flattened by bombs. No food, all the trees were gone from the mountains and the hillsides. There was nothing. The United Nations trucks came in with sugar, flour, cooking oil, and what have you, rice. And the villagers would line up behind the truck to receive their ration, their portion. And there was not enough. The person that shoved you out of the way for the empty seat, for the one vacant seat that was there, when young and taking care of a family, stood in line at that United Nations truck for food, and there was not enough. So what do? You make sure that you're in front of that line, so that you are assured of your ration of food. Because at home, everybody's hungry. Growing up children, undernourished. When you see that picture, it's not possible to remain angry. Your heart opens up. This is how forgiveness works. Do not let forgiveness be just words, an empty gesture. You have to feel it in your heart. Anger melts away. And it's always very easy to find excuses for our own failings, and then we are angry at other people for the same failings. That is not possible anymore. Not if you want to have peace of mind. Not if you want to have a sense of happiness and well-being. which are byproducts of your yoga practice, but only if yoga practice is done right.
I have one question.
Yes, Ali.
Discuss about like relationship, and you said that like if one of the partners has some mistake and like the other partner has to like forgive, right?
Yes.
So but where the mistake comes, where the mistake comes. So according to your speech, like in last session, so samaskara, right, is our memory, right? So it means that like if there is some mistake happening like in our personal life, it means that like we are absorbing that mistake.
First, we must change our habit of labeling things good or bad. So making a mistake we think is bad, but that is because of ego. And we talk about relationship because especially there, it's being magnified. Things that you could accept in another social setting or at work, you find unacceptable from your partner because you're so close with each other and because there are conditions. So it's very human. All that is very human. Making mistakes is human, but human beings also can start playing games. I made a mistake, my partner forgave me. Okay, well, then I don't have to worry so much next time. So making a mistake can be human, it can also end up being intentional. Because my partner is a yogi and understands everything, well, let me just follow my nose and whatever, my partner will forgive me anyway. If you're in such kind of situation, that's called abuse. That's why I said before also, it must come from both sides. And if you notice that people start abusing your goodness, that means you're not fit for each other.
But my question is here that like, if like the person is like abused, right? So why the circumstance comes that, for example, I meet that kind of person? So
if you approach that in the way as we do, it leads to your ignorance gradually turning into wisdom, consciousness. So what we try to do based on the philosophy of the Kleshas is we all come from ignorance and we go down that ladder ending up in fear, being stuck in fear. Most people are in that condition. We try to reverse that and bring it back. But interestingly, when you do this process, ignorance becomes wisdom. And I remember very clearly when I was in the beginning of this process, I felt so elated, so excited when I had solved a problem, bringing it back to its origin. Something I had no idea of became clear because of a confrontation, going through misery, suffering, consciously, leading back to ignorance becoming wisdom. And in my naivety or inexperience, I felt that I could conquer the whole world because I know everything now. Only to come to the realization that I know nothing. that it was only the start of consciousness awakening. Because situations happen again and again. And that is where you have to be humble and overcome your ego. Don't be arrogant to think that you know. Many people on the spiritual path go through a period that they become arrogant. They portray themselves as knowing it all. Have you never met such irritating people? I hope that you overcome that very quickly. Because there's much more to come. And it is much more complicated than in the beginning you think. It's a lifelong process. It never stops. That's also why I said that it's a constant process, starting with ignorance, ending up in fear. You solve that in one particular instance, but it comes back. Because developing insight, for example, in a situation, in a relationship, doesn't give you all the insight and knowledge that you have in a work situation or in a trade in a trade situation or any other different kind of situation. So life just becomes one big field of exploration. And you approach it with a childlike curiosity. Instead of always being so damn serious about everything in life, try to approach it in a much more light-hearted way. There is no good and bad, it all just is. And if you can approach it in that way, you will see that you improve more and more with the years passing. But we have to work for that. We have to earn it, literally. You know, when I came from the Netherlands, I carried a lot of anger with me, frustration, anger. So that's how I got here. It had a function. It fueled what I did. But the side effect was that it led to many conflicts. And being on my way, those conflicts started to really bother me, and just like I'm teaching you about the Kleshas now, I started to go into conversation with myself. Where does all this come from? It's my doing. I am causing all this. So I cannot blame my neighbors. I cannot blame the other business owners in the building where I had my studio for being nasty to me. There is a reason why they're nasty to me and not to the others. I triggered it. I was a hard-boiled egg. I was a stubborn yogi being able to not put one foot down, to put 2 feet down at the same time. And it gets you somewhere, but you have to know when to mellow down. Otherwise, you will just one day find yourself with a heart attack or a stroke or somebody killing you. And everything has turned out very nice. Okay, we have one more sutra. Avidya, ignorance, is taking the non-eternal for the eternal, the impure for the pure, evil for good, and non-Atman for Atman, respectively. Taking the non-eternal for the eternal. There are so many examples of this. Do you remember when you were a child and you looked at your parents and your grandparents? There's a social function, and your aunts and your uncles come to visit, nephews and nieces all around. Then one of your uncles calls your mom by her name. And you say, no, that is not Linda, that is mom. Because you don't realize that your mom years ago was also a child. You also don't realize as a child that your mom one day will be as old as your grandma. You take the non-eternal for eternal. You think your grandma and dad, they've always been grandmom and granddad. And mom and dad, they've always been adult. Mom and dad. Until the day that somebody calls your mom and you start asking questions. Hey, what's going on here? Yeah, don't you know that your mom is my sister? What? Just like my sister, you and my mom? And you scratch your head and your eyes go like this and you start to visualize or envision what is going on. That is how as a child you develop. That's a very simple example. We live in a world, you go to the bathroom, you open the tap, warm water comes out of the tap. You plug in your TV, your phone charger, your washing machine, your coffee maker, and it all works just like that. And you think it's always been like that and it always will be like that. You go to the supermarket, there's food in abundance. Don't realize that tomorrow all that could end. 100 years ago, it didn't even exist. If you wanted to have hot water, you had to make a fire and boil. You had to get the water from the stream, from the river or the lake or wherever. It now just comes out of the wall. You turn a button and it comes out of the wall. But there's a whole machinery behind it that makes that possible. If the slightest thing goes wrong in that order, there's no water anymore, leave alone hot water. There's no electricity anymore. We take those things for granted. If something goes wrong, there is no delivery by the big trucks of food to the supermarket anymore. What do you think will happen? We think we are so civilized, but when society starts to fall apart, which is easily done, this is the biggest concern of our governments, we will turn into animals just to survive. We think we are so civilized, and we are as long as that fine-tuned balance exists. The moment that is disturbed, and that is why governments have a huge police force, a huge army. The most important concern of governments is to keep balance, it's yoga on another level. Keep balance, keep harmony. Because real leaders know what will happen if that harmony is gone. We will start smashing each other's skulls just for a loaf of bread or just something to eat, or very easily. So that is the first one. Taking the impure for pure. Look, you try to find an explanation why almost half of a country follows a leader that constantly tells lies. And they truly believe those lies. That is taking the impure for pure. Hitler, in his beginning years, was very highly admired by a large part of the population in Europe, in Germany. I mentioned in the handout also Saddam Hussein, who had very evil streaks, just like the leader of Libya, what is his name, Gaddafi. Evil. If you read about the torture and the random killing that they caused, both of them, but highly revered, worshipped even almost by a large part of the population. That is taking the impure for pure. An example. Out of ignorance, we don't see the reality. So it brings us back to the first, klesha, avidya, ignorance. Taking evil for good. I mixed up two of them, I think. Taking evil for good is of course about Hitler and other evil leaders, including recently. We have all witnessed what happened and still will continue to happen. Taking the impure for the pure is committing out of egoism, out of greed, we do things, and then when confronted with our misdeeds, we justify them. Yes, but this or that. Excuses. Taking impure for pure. Taking the non-self for the self. That is a little tricky, but the self with capital S, Atman, that is your true characteristics, which for most people is very vague, to say the least. Who we think we are, self with a small s, that is how we have been conditioned to think. I'm Dutch. If you are a little bit a yogi, you would say, so what? But I'm Dutch. And for many Dutch people, that's important, that Dutchness. Just like for Korean people, Koreanness is important. For Chinese, Chineseness is important. Many wars and conflicts occur because of that identification. Atman has, of course, nothing to do with that. Real self has nothing to do with that. Because when you realize the real self, you realize we're all the same flesh and blood, from the same source of intelligence, the same ball of energy, all the same. We hurt the same, we enjoy the same. But out of ignorance, I say I'm Dutch. And if I'm a little bit chauvinistic, I say I'm a man. I'm even proud of it. These kind of things. That is taking the non-self for self, saying I am this, I'm that, I'm a pilot, or I'm a yogi, or whatever. No, I'm not. There is a high samadhi technique in which you deny being anything. And for me, that has been very helpful in the beginning stages of my transformation, from my teenage years to my yogi life. Because I started, of course, to identify myself with Korea. Because I practiced Hapkido. Because of Hapkido, I became interested in Korea. And it was all I could think of. I thought I was Bruce Lee with my Hapkido. Of course I was not. Learning that technique from Ajita, every time I felt my chest swelling, I said, no, I'm not. not Hapkido, not Korea, I'm not yoga, I'm not Ron, I'm not Dutch. Just detaching from any kind of identification that you have. You think that is a foolish thing to do? It is a very powerful way to end up with your true essence, your Atman. That is why it is a samadhi exercise. What you are disturbed by in your higher meditations is any thought that you have or any identification that you feel. So you nip that in the bud simply by denying all of that. It is the reason why in spiritual circles often you hear people saying, "Oh, I'm nothing." And when you give them compliments about something that they did for you or something that they are good at, they will always hold it off and say, no, I don't deserve all that praise. But that's also fake. When you get a compliment, you deserve that if you have done something well. So you just accept it without blowing it up. Oh, okay, thank you, you're welcome. Otherwise, you violate the first principles that you learned about truthfulness. There was one more. No, that's it. Questions? Okay. Try first and foremost to be aware how your thought processes and decisions are greatly influenced, first and foremost, by fear. Ego, attachment. If you're in a relationship, try to see your relationship as a school of learning. Because relationships, if you are in a relationship with an open mind and willing to learn, that is a huge source of learning. About human nature in general, but about yourself in specific. You learn so much about yourself, your fears, attachment, limitations, possibilities, abilities, qualities. Hugely instructive. There are people who are in a relationship that ends and then say, okay, I'm done. I don't ever have to be in a relationship again. It hurts and it's only this, only that, very negative. If you have been in more than one relationship, you notice that each relationship brings you to a higher level. You notice that the experience from the previous relationship makes your next relationship better. Don't ever give up. Don't be foolish. Don't rush into anything I've been single for a couple of years. I needed that. Why? To grow, to allow all the pieces of the puzzle fall into place. Because I realized that my relationships ended up in misery because I needed something from that relationship. So I came to the conclusion, I have to be totally independent before I start a relationship again. So I studied Korean for years because I have to be in a situation that I don't have to ask a possible partner or anybody else to help me with doing things. I'm running a business, I have an administration. Sometimes you have to go to a doctor or a dentist. I do everything myself. I don't want to be depending on anybody. And from that position of independence, you can then be in a position of being in a more purer relationship. I don't blame anybody in the past for my misery. Most people do. I don't. I did it myself. I brought myself or opened myself in that situation because of impure motives, thinking that it is pure. Do you recognize this? Do you recognize that you feel attracted to a certain person and the alarm bells are going off? There are warning signs even before the relationship starts. Do you recognize this? What do? You dismiss them. Because there are overriding principles that at that moment you think are more important. You end up in a load of misery. You do that consciously, you learn, you grow, and you draw your conclusions. Take action. Do not allow that to happen again. But do not avoid it also, because then you stop your growth potential. Life is a constant dynamic process of growth. Most people do not allow that. Do not invite that growth out of fear. Patanjali says, and we will come to that next week, misery that has not come can and must be avoided. That means don't be foolish, don't be stupid. But it does not mean just to avoid living life, to avoid relationships overall. Just learn from past mistakes. Anyway, we will come back to that when we discuss that sutra. Questions? Okay, let's have a short break.